Hi, automotive enthusiasts. Welcome to Cam and Crank, where today we're diving into one of the most striking and controversial machines ever to wear the Raging Bull badge, the 1974 Lamborghini Countach LP400. This isn't just a car, it's a revolution on wheels, a vehicle that turned the world of exotic automobiles upside down with its shocking design and unrelenting vision. When it first appeared, the Countach looked less like a sports car and more like a stealth fighter or a concept from the distant future. Its wedge-shaped body, scissor doors, and impossibly low stance made everything else on the road look tame, almost ordinary. And that shock factor wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, calculated, and daring. Today we're going to explore why the Countach LP400 mattered so much. We'll peel back the layers of how Lamborghini and its designers at Bertone decided to gamble on a design so radical it risked alienating traditional buyers. How the engineering beneath that wild body both pushed boundaries and created headaches. And how the Countach's audacity eventually set the standard for what we now call the modern supercar. This story is about ambition, risk, and cultural transformation. It's about a company that refused to play it safe, about designers who believed cars could be rolling art, and about the cultural appetite for excess and spectacle that found its perfect symbol in a car born in the early 1970s. Imagine yourself back in that decade. The oil crisis loomed, regulations were tightening, and automakers were being told to tone down performance, improve efficiency, and make vehicles safer and more rational. Against that backdrop, Lamborghini unleashed the Countach, which ignored all those cautious voices and doubled down on spectacle and raw presence. To understand its impact, we need to look at where Lamborghini came from, why its founder Ferruccio, Lamborghini demanded something unlike anything else, and how a young designer named Marcello Gandini turned a radical sketch into a production car. The stakes were high. This was more than just a model. It was a gamble for Lamborghini's future. Over the next chapters of this story, we'll walk through how the Countach shocked the world with its debut, how it was engineered and received in its first LP400 form, and how its cultural ripple effect spread far beyond Italy into posters on bedroom walls and imaginations worldwide. Stick with me because by the end of this deep dive, you'll see why the Lamborghini Countach LP400 wasn't just another exotic car, but the very definition of what it means to build a supercar with no compromises and no apologies. This is a tale of design audacity, mechanical obsession, and cultural legacy, all wrapped into one unforgettable machine. So buckle up because the ride into the story of the Lamborghini Countach LP400 is about to begin. The Lamborghini Countach LP400 began life not as a production car, but as a radical idea. A vision that seemed impossible in the conservative climate of the early 1970s. Lamborghini had already made waves with the Miura, which stunned the world, by introducing the mid-engine layout to a production supercar, but Ferruccio Lamborghini wasn't satisfied with merely keeping pace. He wanted something bolder, something that would ensure Lamborghini stood apart from Ferrari and every other Italian exotic builder. That's when the design house Bertone and its young star Marcello Gandini came into play, bringing forward a shape that seemed to leap from the pages of science fiction. The wedge, the scissor doors, the wide stance, all elements so far removed from anything people had ever seen that the Countach looked almost alien. Yet this alien vision was destined to become the blueprint of the supercar era. Microstory, the prototype's first shock. In 1971, at the Geneva Motor Show, Lamborghini unveiled the Countach prototype. The name itself was an expletive, in Piedmontese dialect, meant to express amazement, and the crowd reaction fit it perfectly. The body was impossibly low, barely reaching the waist of an average man, with lines sharp enough to cut the air. This wasn't a car meant to blend in. It was a statement. Journalists didn't know what to make of it. Was it beautiful, grotesque, or both? The Countach challenged the very idea of what a car could look like, daring audiences to rethink aesthetics. That prototype became the rallying point for Lamborghini's future, even though nobody knew if such a radical machine could actually be made roadworthy. Context Digest: From Miura to Countach. Before the Countach, Lamborghini's Miura had already redefined expectations, but it was elegant, curvaceous, and sensual. The Countach took the opposite approach, slicing curves into angular edges. This was not an evolution, it was a revolution, showing that Lamborghini wasn't afraid to abandon its own playbook. That sudden break from tradition raised eyebrows, but also signaled to the world that the brand was no longer following trends. It was setting them. Microstory: Gandini's Wedge obsession. Marcello Gandini wasn't just sketching a car. He was exploring how to turn geometric purity into motion. He had experimented with wedge concepts in earlier Bertone designs like the Lancia Stratos Zero, but the Countach LP400 prototype was the first time that philosophy would be tested as a real production vehicle. The scissor doors weren't just dramatic, they were practical, allowing entry in tight spaces where normal doors wouldn't open. Every line of the body had a reason, even if it appeared extreme. Gandini wanted something unapologetically futuristic, and Lamborghini gave him the freedom to go all the way. Reflection bridge. By the time engineers were tasked with making the Countach real, the dream collided with the hard reality of physics and regulations. Microstory: engineering a dream into metal. Turning the show car into the LP400 required enormous compromises and innovation. The initial prototype was too fragile, so engineers created a tubular space frame chassis to provide strength without excessive weight. The engine layout also shifted. Lamborghini rotated its legendary V12 to sit longitudinally, improving cooling and packaging but creating new challenges for drivability. With a manual gearbox mounted ahead of the engine, a shaft ran back beneath the oil pan, an unusual solution that improved weight distribution but was tricky to maintain. Everything about the Countach required inventiveness, because nothing else like it existed. Engineers were writing a rulebook as they went. Context digest: the mid-70s backdrop. Remember, this was the mid-1970s, a time of rising fuel, prices, new emissions rules, and increasing pressure for practicality. Lamborghini's insistence on producing a car like the Countach seemed almost reckless. Where other companies hedged with safer designs, Lamborghini went in the opposite direction, refusing compromise. It was an act of defiance, but also one of survival. Standing out meant attention, and attention meant sales, even if the product was far from practical. Microstory: the LP400 hits the road. In 1974, the Countach LP400 became a production reality. With 375 horsepower from a 4-liter V12 and a weight of just over 2,600 pounds, it was brutally fast for the time, but numbers told only half the story. Driving one was a sensory overload. The cabin was tight, the pedals offset, the rear visibility nearly non-existent. Heat seeped in from the engine bay, and mechanical noises filled the interior. Yet none of that mattered to the customers. What mattered was the feeling of piloting something so outrageous, so unlike anything else, that the discomforts felt like proof you were experiencing something extraordinary. Reflection bridge: that combination of brilliance and imperfection became the Countach's trademark, and as word spread, it moved from curiosity to icon. Microstory: the owner's reality. Early LP400 buyers weren't buying practicality. They were buying bragging rights and raw theater. Parking one on a city street guaranteed a crowd. The car was difficult to maneuver, impossible to see out of, and exhausting on long trips, but it delivered an unmatched sense of occasion. These owners became part of the Countach's myth, living with the inconveniences because the reward was cultural impact as much as performance. Owning one was like holding a piece of the future, even if that future came with quirks. Context digest: why radical mattered. What Lamborghini achieved with the Countach LP400 wasn't just a fast car, but a statement of values. In an industry leaning toward restraint, Lamborghini showed that extremity could be a selling point. The wedge shape became a symbol of speed and modernity, inspiring imitators and cementing Lamborghini's reputation as the rebel brand. It wasn't about blending in, it was about forcing people to look, to react, to remember. Microstory: the poster phenomenon begins. Even in its earliest days, the Countach transcended the showroom. Photographers captured its shocking silhouette, and magazines placed it front and center as the symbol of exotic motoring. Soon, posters of the LP400 began appearing on bedroom walls, transforming it from niche exotic into a mainstream dream. Kids who had never seen one in person could still imagine themselves behind its scissor doors. That cultural saturation elevated the Countach into more than a car. It became a shared aspiration across generations. The LP400 had proven that radical design could succeed, even when it defied practicality. But as Lamborghini evolved, the Countach in later years, the stakes would only grow higher, pushing the boundaries of excess and shaping how the world defined a supercar. As the Countach LP400 settled into the automotive landscape, Lamborghini faced a new challenge: how to evolve this outrageous machine without losing the magic that made it iconic. The LP400 had stunned the world with its pure wedge design, but as the decade moved on, regulations tightened, customers demanded more performance, and rivals like Ferrari sought to reclaim attention. Lamborghini couldn't rest. It had to double down. That meant new iterations, more power, and increasingly dramatic styling choices that would cement the Countach not just as a car of the moment, but as a cultural phenomenon of the entire era. Microstory: birth of the LP400S. By the late 1970s, Lamborghini introduced the LP400S. This wasn't just an update, it was a transformation. The once pure wedge of the LP400 gained muscular wheel arches to house wider tires, creating a more aggressive stance. The suspension was revised, ride height lowered, and new Campagnolo wheels gave the car a tougher presence. What it lost in purity, it gained in spectacle. The LP400S announced to the world that the Countach was not a fleeting experiment, but a maturing icon with evolving muscle. Context digest: the global supercar race. Lamborghini wasn't alone in pushing extremes. Ferrari unveiled the Berlinetta Boxer, Porsche refined the 911 Turbo, and Maserati attempted bold designs of its own. The Countach, however, stood apart because it wasn't just fast, it looked like speed incarnate. In a global race for attention, Lamborghini's philosophy was clear: shock and awe first, practicality later. The LP400S embodied that principle, widening the Countach's cultural footprint. Microstory: engineering around limits. With new tires and suspension came greater handling potential, but also new headaches. The V12 engine remained potent, but emissions laws and noise restrictions began choking performance. Engineers struggled to balance regulations with Lamborghini's promise of raw thrills. Customers, however, didn't buy the Countach for efficiency. They bought it because it ignored efficiency altogether. Lamborghini's defiance became a brand statement, one that attracted admiration from enthusiasts, but increasing scrutiny from authorities. Reflection bridge. As Lamborghini leaned harder into excess, the Countach transformed from futuristic prototype into the archetype of 1980s extravagance. Microstory: the LP500S and 5000 Quattro Valvole. By the early 1980s, Lamborghini enlarged the engine to 4.8 liters in the LP500S, then to 5.2 liters in the 5000 Quattro Valvole. Power climbed past 450 horsepower, giving the Countach performance to match its appearance. The Quattro Valvole's bulging engine cover, created to clear 6 carburetors, added even more drama to the rear profile. Every update seemed designed, not to refine the Countach, but to amplify its excess. These cars weren't evolving toward subtlety. They were racing toward ultimate spectacle. Context digest: the supercar as pop culture. The Countach wasn't confined to car magazines anymore. It began appearing in music videos, movies, and television shows, symbolizing ultimate wealth and rebellion. From Miami Vice aesthetics to wall posters in every teenage bedroom, the Countach became the universal shorthand for success and speed. In this way, Lamborghini achieved something Ferrari hadn't. Its car became not just admired, but fantasized about by millions who would never sit behind its wheel. Microstory: the anniversario and the end of an era. By the late 1980s, Lamborghini celebrated its 25th anniversary with the Countach 25th Anniversary Edition. Styled by Horacio Pagani, it piled on aerodynamic add-ons and strakes, pushing the wedge shape to its theatrical limit. Critics argued it had lost the purity of the original LP400, but fans adored its outrageousness. It was the swan song of a car that had dominated an era, closing one of the wildest chapters in supercar history. Reflection bridge. What began as a radical idea had grown into a symbol of 1980s culture, but the Countach's excess also highlighted the tension between timeless design and fashionable extremes. Micro-story. Ownership in the 1980s. Driving a Countach in that decade was like being a celebrity without needing to be famous. Crowds gathered, cameras flashed, and other cars parted in awe. Yet owners still faced the same old quirks: near-zero visibility, brutal heat, and awkward ergonomics. But those flaws no longer mattered, because by the 1980s, owning a Countach wasn't about driving, it was about being seen. The car became a rolling stage, and its drivers the actors in an ongoing performance of speed and style. Context digest. The rise of the poster icon. By the mid-1980s, the Countach was the most recognizable exotic car in the world. The wedge shape defined what children thought a supercar should be, and it became the default template for video games, cartoons, and advertisements. This saturation meant that even people with no interest in cars knew what a Countach was. Its cultural impact dwarfed its production numbers, making it larger than life. Micro-story. Countach versus reality. Beneath the fantasy, the Countach remained difficult to live with. Road tests often highlighted its flaws: steering heavy at low speeds, brakes that required force, and a clutch that demanded strong legs. Yet those very flaws reinforced its mythology. The Countach wasn't a car to make life easy, it was a car to make life unforgettable. Each imperfection became part of the legend, the price one paid for a taste of the extraordinary. The Countach had journeyed from pure concept to cultural titan, but its story wasn't finished. What mattered most was how this radical Lamborghini influenced everything that followed, shaping not only its successors, but the very language of the supercar. The Countach's final legacy wasn't measured in horsepower or lap times, it was measured in influence. After nearly 2 decades of production, the Countach left behind a blueprint for what the world expected a supercar to be. Low, dramatic, unapologetic, and unforgettable. The LP400 had shocked the 1970s. The Quattro Valvole and Anniversary editions defined the 1980s, and together they forged an archetype so strong that even today, modern Lamborghinis carry echoes of Gandini's Wedge. But beyond Lamborghini itself, the Countach reshaped global car culture, proving that design could matter as much as performance. Micro-story. The blueprint for the Diablo. When Lamborghini began developing the Countach's successor, the Diablo, it faced an impossible task. How do you replace a car that had become the very symbol of exotic excess? The Diablo refined the formula with smoother lines and greater usability, but it never abandoned the dramatic stance or scissor doors. This continuity showed how deeply the Countach had set the rules, every Lamborghini after it had to carry a piece of its DNA. Context digest. Influence on rivals. Ferrari, Porsche, and even Japanese automakers couldn't ignore what the Countach represented. The wedge aesthetic informed concepts from Toyota and Nissan, while Ferrari experimented with sharper lines in models like the Testarossa. Supercars were no longer just about performance. They had to look outrageous because the Countach had proven spectacle could drive desire as strongly as speed. Micro-story. The poster car generation grows up. The teenagers who plastered Countach posters on their walls in the 1980s grew into adults who became designers, engineers, and collectors. For them, the Countach wasn't just an image, it was the seed of their automotive passion. Many of today's modern hypercars, from the McLaren P1 to the Bugatti Chiron, owe a quiet debt to the Countach for proving that emotion and shock value belong at the core of ultimate performance cars. Reflection bridge. What once shocked the world became the standard by which all later exotics were judged. Micro-story. The collector's holy grail. Today, early LP400, Periscopio. Models are among the most sought-after Lamborghinis on the market. Collectors value them not only for rarity, but for purity. as they capture the unfiltered vision of Gandini before later editions piled on wings and spoilers. Auctions see them trading for millions, proof that the audacity of 1974 still resonates with modern enthusiasts. The LP400 represents the moment when imagination overcame restraint, and buyers are willing to pay dearly for that spark of history. Context Digest: Legacy in Pop Media. Decades after production ended, the Countach still appears in films, TV, and even music videos. Its silhouette is instantly recognizable, and new generations discover it not as a relic, but as a timeless symbol of rebellion and aspiration. That staying power is rare, reserved for icons like the Mustang, the Porsche 911, and the Corvette. But the Countach occupies a unique space. It doesn't just represent a brand, it represents the very idea of what a supercar should look like. Micro-story. The name returns. Lamborghini knew the Countach's myth was too powerful to leave behind forever. In 2021, the company unveiled a modern reinterpretation, blending Aventador underpinnings with Countach-inspired styling. Reception was mixed. Some saw it as unnecessary nostalgia, others as a fitting tribute. But the fact that the name could return decades later and still command headlines proved the depth of its cultural weight. Few names in automotive history carry that kind of resonance. Reflection Bridge. From wild concept to enduring legacy, the Countach had traveled full circle, reminding the world that audacity never goes out of style. Micro-story, a symbol beyond cars. The Countach transcended the automotive world to become a cultural metaphor. People use the word to describe anything shocking, daring, or over the top, even outside of motoring. That linguistic legacy shows how the car embedded itself into the wider imagination, turning from a niche exotic into a universal reference point. The Countach became more than transportation. It became language, symbol, and myth. The story of the Countach LP400 and its successors isn't just about Lamborghini, it's about the power of design and boldness to reshape an industry and inspire generations. In the end, the Countach wasn't perfect, and it was never meant to be. It was outrageous, difficult, and uncompromising. And that is exactly why it endures. Because sometimes the world doesn't remember what's practical. It remembers what's unforgettable. Hi, automotive enthusiasts. What we've uncovered together is that the Lamborghini Countach LP400 wasn't merely a car from 1974, but a turning point in how the world defined speed, style, and daring. We've seen how it burst onto the scene, as an impossible wedge of futuristic design, how it evolved through the 1970s and 1980s into a cultural titan, and how its influence carried forward long after production ended. Along the way, the Countach challenged convention, frustrated engineers, thrilled owners, and captured imaginations across the globe. It proved that cars could be more than machines. They could be theater, aspiration, and art on wheels. What makes the Countach story so compelling is its duality. It was flawed yet adored, impractical yet unforgettable. Its design shocked people into paying attention, its engineering pushed boundaries, and its presence redefined what a supercar could be. The fact that decades later we still talk about it, still revere its silhouette, and still measure new Lamborghinis against its standard tells us just how powerful one bold vision can be. And this is the enduring lesson of the Countach: audacity matters. In a world where compromise often shapes outcomes, the Countach reminds us that daring choices can leave the deepest marks. Whether you're an enthusiast who remembers the posters, a collector chasing an LP400, or someone just discovering this machine, the Countach continues to spark the same reaction its name suggests: astonishment. Thanks for riding with us on Cam and Crank. See you next time, automotive enthusiasts.